Thanks, Sarah. And if you don't mind just keeping your slides up, and then you can play the video, and then I'll take over. Yeah, thanks so much for your introduction to climate change and why it matters, not only for us as investors, but also as a society. Many of us are parents or grandparents. It's also about the world that we're leaving to the next generation. And when one thinks about generations and generational investing, pension and retirement funds are a great example of long-term investors. If you think about a new kind of employee, somebody in their late teens or early 20s joining an employer like local government or public health sector as a nurse, everything going well, they've got a good 30-40 years of working life ahead of them. And so for your retirement funds that are investing on behalf of members across multiple age spectrums, retirement funds are a classic example of a long-term investor, and why it is so important that we're not just worried about the financial returns that a particular company will be giving us over the next 3 months, but rather, what are the types of investment returns we can look to achieve in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And so trying to put on that kind of long-term investor lens. And one of the world's largest retirement funds is the Japanese Public Pension Fund, or the GPIF, the Government Pension Investment Fund of Japan. And we're going to listen to the former Chief Investment Officer of the Government Pension Fund of Japan. They are the world's largest retirement fund, and they've got one of the largest fixed income or bond portfolios in the world. And, if we think of Japan, we always think of the elderly, upside down age pyramid, where they've got a very young working, a very small working age population with a large band of very aged, people in Japan, because they are a healthier nation. They have small families, and they generally live for a long time. And so these, of course, present unique challenges and opportunities to pension funds like the Government Pension Fund of Japan. And so this is an interview with the former Chief Investment Officer of the Government Pension Fund of Japan, Hiro Mizuno. And Hiro has become a little bit of a legend for his time at the Japanese pension fund. And he really put Japan on the responsible investing map, both as a country, but also just because they are such a large investor, much like the Government Employees Pension Fund of South Africa, and their asset manager, the PIC, has phenomenal leverage and power and opportunity to drive change. So let's have a listen. Sarah's going to play the video, and let's listen to why this is important for an investor like the Japanese pension fund. Thanks, Sarah.
GPF, as the largest asset owner in the world, we do everything we can to make sure asset owner take sustainability seriously. We have
Darren, can you just try and adjust the volume a little louder if possible?
As the buffer fund for 100-year sustainable pension scheme project. So we are, by definition, a very, very long-term investor. We just cannot.
Let me try that, Adrian. Sorry about that.
Make our investment very sustainable.
It seems this is the last.
If the whole capital market is not
okay, we'll make do with that. Thank you.
And we thought for the capital market to be sustainable, society has to be sustainable. And then again, for the society to be sustainable, environment must be sustainable. We are the biggest institutional clients of the asset management industry. So we are using this, the clout or like a weight to change the industry practice. ESG integration should be in every aspect of our business. So selection of the asset managers, selection of their portfolio, and how we monitor the asset managers, how the asset manager exercises proxy voting. Every single aspect of our activities should integrate ESG into their decision making. And GPF made it very clear, that we expect all of us, our asset manager, integrate ESG into their investment analysis and investment decision making. The problem of today's capital market is a short-termism. That now, that a lot of trade made by machines who has no interest in long-term issue, right? Now the probably average holding time of the New York Stock Exchange is probably less than a month, because there are a lot of trade made by machine at the sort of, sometimes nanosecond cycle. We just cannot let the machine to control the capital market. And it's our human investors' role to make sure that we take care of our future generation. So we are actually revising and revisiting all the rule books we have with the asset manager. And if we see something we are doing not consistently with our long-term perspective, we change it. Majority of our portfolio is actually managed passively by passive or index manager. What we now expect from our passive managers is manage the portfolio passively, but act as an active owner. So the stewardship activities involves the engagement, which is the constructive dialogue with the companies, and the proxy voting. And that's the area where the passive manager can actually differentiate and also add value. So if any passive managers is not willing to take that responsibility or add the value in the stewardship area, that's not the attractive partner for us. We want the passive manager to become a responsible owner, because you control the lion's share of our voting power. Traditionally, asset owners always talk about the long-termism, but asset owners' contract with the asset managers remained annual renewable. So, which I thought really inconsistent. So on one hand, we are demanding active managers to manage with long-term perspective, but we don't give them the long-term contract. We change whole contract with our active manager to change their fee to performance-based. So now the active manager, if they don't perform, they're not going to receive any active manager-like fee. But at the same time, we agree with all our active manager their performance fee to be calculated over 5 years. So we become the first asset owner, according to investment, the consultant, to offer 5-year contract to active managers. As a big owner of the passive portfolio, to make the extra return out of our passive portfolio, people like us, we lend the stock to short sellers. And we make a lot of money by lending it. But I actually came to realize it's not really consistent with what we are saying as a long-term investor. We are basically, saying, that you guys have to deal with these long-term issues, and we support your transformation. But in reality, the stock is used by short seller. They put the huge short-term pressure on those corporate executives. So I said, it's not consistent. We should stop it. We decided to give up $100 million in easy money to be consistent with our long-term, strategy. In the business today, everybody is talking about sustainability. But if you look at the textbook or the curriculum, what the school, our MBA school are teaching, there's nothing to do with the sustainability, nothing to do ESG. That's weird. So how about a business school started teaching the case study on a GPF? The title is, should pension fund try to change the world? GPF's embracement of the ESG. And it's become one of the most popular case study at Harvard. And I really trying to put that in every, the business school education. Role of finance is not to create the future, but the finance is to provide a capital to the people who have great ideas or the people who try to build the future, right? And so we are kind of the accelerator for those change makers. The other CIO told me our job is to save money, not to save the planet. But I counter argue saying like, what's the point of receiving a pension when our children cannot even play outside?
Thanks so much, Seren, for sharing the video with us. I'm going to share screen now, and then we'll do a bit of a debrief on the video. And then we've also got a polling question. But before we load the polling question, just an opportunity for some discussion. That was the former chief investment officer of one of the largest retirement funds in the world. It would be interesting to hear some of your thoughts and views on what Hiro was saying around priorities for the government pension fund of Japan. But I see the poll has been loaded. So here's a question. Does your organization consider ESG when contracting with asset managers? So for those of you who are trustees or shop stewards and you're aware of what's going on in your affiliated retirement funds, do you know whether the pension fund requires the ESG issues to be addressed in contracting with fund managers? Yes, no, or don't know, or perhaps not applicable if you don't know, in terms of you don't have insight into the pension fund. So it looks like 2/3 are saying yes and 1/3 are saying don't know. Thank you to those who've been able to respond. So yeah, 2/3 saying yes, we are aware that ESG issues are being included in our contracting with our fund managers, and 1/3 have got some homework to do to go and find out whether or not your pension fund is contracting legally on ESG requirements when it comes to appointing fund managers. Let's share the results and then we can close the poll. And so before we talk about the need for long-term investors to consider climate risks, I'd love to hear from some of our workshop participants as to any comments or views you might have on that example or case study from the Japanese pension fund. Was there anything particularly that struck you or was of particular interest? I'm going to actually stop the sharing of my screen so that I can see if there are any hands going up. Would anybody like to make a comment on that example of the Japanese pension fund? I'm not seeing any hands, but did you recognize their view to say, look, we need to have a philosophy or a policy or an approach, and then how we contract and incentivize our fund managers needs to be aligned to that philosophy. So raising the point that there needs to be alignment of interest. So actually appointing fund managers for a longer duration appointment as opposed to short 1-year appointments. So making sure that they perform over the longer term and giving them time to perform over the longer term rather than making them chase short-term quarterly performance because they know that they might not be reappointed by the pension fund for the next year. What struck me was also their approach for, performance fees for predominantly passive managers, so that there's alignment of interest. So, fund managers are getting the benefit when the pension fund gets the benefit. And of course, fees are always contentious between clients and service providers, but making an effort to align interests in terms of performance fees being paid. And then what was also interesting was their decision to stop securities lending or stock lending because they viewed that as, being against their philosophy or approach as a long-term, steward of their investment portfolio, and not wanting to make companies chase short-term profits, which some of the hedge funds are doing at the end of the day. And yeah, stewardship came through very clearly in that video. They recognized the need for them to act as stewards of their members and pensioners' assets, that they need to ask their fund managers to also partner with them in stewardship. So they're wanting to make sure that even passive managers who are just following an index are actually engaging with companies on important environmental, social, and corporate governance issues, that they are voting at company AGMs, and that they're not just holding the shares and kind of ignoring what's going on in terms of ESG issues when material. One of the projects that the Japanese pension fund did was they actually engaged with their investee companies, so the companies that their fund managers are investing in on their behalf. And it was quite interesting because they wanted to hear from the companies themselves to what extent the investors or the fund managers appointed by the Japanese pension fund are taking ESG issues seriously. So I thought that was quite clever because, generally, if you ask your service providers or your asset managers, are you doing enough on ESG? They will certainly say, yes, we're doing a lot, and we've voted at so many AGMs, and we've had so many engagements. But often if you push them and if you change the scenario and you go and speak to the company themselves, they might have a different story. And they might say, look, we haven't heard from this investment manager on ESG issues. And so it is critically important for trustees and those that are managing retirement funds to have effective oversight of service providers like fund managers, making sure that they are delivering on their mandates, that it's contracted legally with them, that they need to consider ESG issues, that they need to report to you as the client on what they're doing. And this is important not just for ESG issues, but specifically in the area of climate. And with South Africa being so tied to our carbon intensive electricity generator in Eskom, all of our companies that we invest in are exposed to higher carbon emissions than some of our international peers, for example, that may be able to make better use of renewables. Now, we are scheduled to take a comfort break for 10 minutes at 10:40, and I was about to start with my section, but I think, we've been going since 9 o'clock, so I'm going to suggest that we do break now for a quick 10-minute coffee comfort break. Please take 10 minutes, but do come back at 10 minutes to 11 so that we can proceed with the next section. And can I ask that when you come back, if you can just let us know in the chat function that you're back from your coffee break, or if you can just raise your hand to let us know that you're back from the break. So it's 10:37 on my clock now, 10:38. Please take 12 minutes, 10 minutes to take a coffee break, comfort break, and let's meet back together at 10:50, 10 minutes to 11. I'll make a note of that in the chat function. But please do use this opportunity for a comfort and coffee break, and we'll get going at 10 minutes to 11 again. Thanks very much, and see you soon.